From Montana's news leader, this is the MTN Noon News.
Good afternoon and welcome to your MTN News on this Thursday. I'm Augusta McDonnell. Ed McIntosh has our forecast in just a few, but let's get to our top story. President Donald Trump officially imposed new tariffs on several countries. The decision already set off retaliatory actions from those countries, leading to a possible escalating trade war. It's a move that some worry could lead to you paying more at the grocery store. With more on this and the snowball effect it could have, here's our Matt Carmack.
Just Tuesday, the CEO of Target, Brian Cornell, said he expects grocery prices to rise within the next couple of days. But we wanted to see how local shoppers here in Montana would be impacted by those tariffs. It's a word you've probably heard everywhere in the past couple of weeks.
April 2nd, reciprocal tariffs.
Tariffs, a tax on foreign goods imported into the United States. Here in Montana, most of our imported goods from Canada are petroleum, wood, and animal products, while we heavily rely on produce like strawberries and avocados from Mexico.
I'm really not worried about it one bit.
Billings resident Greg Hyder says he isn't concerned about the new 25% tariff on Mexican and Canadian goods.
To me, it really just boils down to a negotiation tactic. It's really what it's going to come down to. I mean, Canada has been tariffing us.
But many economists argue that that negotiation tactic could have big impacts on your wallet.
It does have a pretty significant impact on the prices that you and I pay on any given day.
Robert Snor with the University of Montana says that while businesses and producers pay the tariff, the tax is ultimately passed down to the consumer.
It's going to raise prices for anything that we buy that's imported from Canada and Mexico.
Here in Montana, that could mean paying more at the grocery store, especially for produce we can't grow in the state.
Produce is very seasonal, and yet people want that produce throughout the year. Whereas things like wheat, barley, beef, potatoes, those are things that even in Montana, we can produce that year round.
Ian Finch runs the food access program at Farm Connect Montana. It's an organization that connects SNAP benefit recipients to affordable, locally grown food.
Our position now is, we hope people really look to local food sources because when, for instance, during the COVID pandemic, when we saw shelves empty, the local food was still there.
Ian says that at a time with high tariffs and inflation, locally grown food may be more affordable than what's at the grocery store.
Consumers are going to turn to these for support when the general grocery store price is higher.
But because the tariffs are new, Robert says the full future impacts are still a question mark.
We're all facing a lot of uncertainty, and no one knows what the outcome is going to be.
In Billings, Matt Carmack, MTN News.
These tariffs are also causing great concern in one sector where Montana leads the nation, in agriculture. Paul Canning is a Northeast Montana farmer, and he says when the U.S. imposes tariffs, farmers often suffer in the form of retaliation. He says the timing is far from ideal because farmers are already recovering from previous tariffs on China and India. Those tariffs cut worldwide exports by roughly 37%. He adds that with no recourse for the people producers rely on to get the products to market, they can lose industry partners. Canning says he has no idea how long these will last, but hopes it's short-lived.
We don't want this to drag on, through the summer and into harvest. We certainly don't want that. And we also would like them to be enduring and persistent and lasting. So we don't want to go through this 2 or 3 years down the road also.
Canning is the chairman of the U.S. Dry Pea and Lentil Council Board and says they've made their voices heard in Washington. For now, spring-like weather is taking a backseat to a bit of a wintry return. Let's take a look at Red Lodge now. Fresh snow for skiers is falling there, a change from the recent warm-up we've been seeing. Again, let's check in with Ed McIntosh to see how long this will last.
Looking across southern Montana, some of the roadways around Monida Pass heading right down south of Dillon. You can see some of the snow and blowing snow that's starting to develop on I-90. Norris Hill between, say, the Three Forks and Big Sky area. This one looks like we're going to have some serious travel problems in the short term. And Bozeman Pass showing signs of being slick here as of midday, along with just outside of there on Livingston area right around I-90. Doppler radar picking up on some of those snow showers across southern Montana and northern Wyoming here through the middle of the day with winter storm warnings, winter weather advisories, some travel concerns. We'll talk more about that coming up.
In the courtroom yesterday, a Billings man has been found guilty of deliberate homicide in the death of his 4-year-old stepson. That decision coming after nearly 5 hours of deliberation and after Christopher Harrisumchek took the stand in defense of himself. The jury returned with 3 guilty counts covering all charges against Harrisumchek. He was accused of causing the death of his 4-year-old stepson in 2021 after the boy was found unresponsive in the family's bathtub. The boy's mother says Harrisumchek was physically abusive to her and her 3 children during the course of their relationship. A sentencing date has yet to be set. These convictions carry a potential total of 115 years in prison at sentencing. In Missoula, the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Center has been caught in the crosshairs of DOJ's government cost cutting, with the center receiving notice that their federal funding will be terminated. MTN's Zach Volheim reports.
At the University of Montana, the Mansfield Center has recently come under pressure after they were sent a letter of termination for their federal grants.
$6 million to the University of Montana to strengthen American democracy by bridging divides.
On Friday, the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Center was notified that their federal grant funding would be cut. Founded by an act of Congress in 1983, the center used the money for programs that promoted civic engagement and democracy forums in Montana's schools. The money also paid for a 2-week workshop in Washington, D.C., among other things.
The Mansfield Center's work was essential for national security priorities, allowed us to broaden the scale of our work, to bring in thousands more high school students, to support hundreds more classrooms, to engage a lot more activities. And there's been great response to the work that we're doing.
The center had federal grants totaling $3 million a year, starting in September 2023, and it was supposed to go to September of 2026. But the Department of Defense found the grant money was not in line with the department's priorities. Executive Director Dina Mansauer disagrees.
We are a nonpartisan center. We are probably the best positioned in the country to align with Department of Defense priorities for warfighting.
With the announcement, the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Center is left in a difficult position as less than 0.5% of their funding comes from the university. This could impact jobs.
We had some faith in the word of the government. We had some faith in the word of Congress in appropriating these funds. So we're in the midst of having to probably terminate a lot of programs ourselves that we don't want to do.
Officials at the Mansfield Center told MTN that they spoke with Montana's congressional delegation, Senator Daines and Senator Sheehy, and they told MTN that both the senators expressed support for the Mansfield Center. In Missoula, I'm Zach Volheim, MTN News.
Rallying to protect Medicaid in Montana. MTN's John Amy spoke with protesters outside Senator Tim Sheehy's Butte office yesterday to hear their concerns.
About 3 dozen protesters gathered outside of Senator Tim Sheehy's Butte office to demand that programs like Medicaid and even Social Security not be cut. Some say they need these programs to survive.
I'd be worried that if my health condition took a turn for the worst, I wouldn't be able to pay for it and I would end up in debt.
They're concerned that Montana's Medicaid will be affected if the federal government cuts back on financial support of the program, which the feds cover about 90% of the cost. Some protesters are asking Sheehy to support it at the federal level.
His vote matters very, very much in the future of funding for Medicaid in the state of Montana.
Sheehy was not in the Butte office, but a representative for the senator allowed some protesters into her office, heard concerns, and would relate them to the senator. Some protesters also left sticky notes on Sheehy's office with demands and concerns. The Sheehy representative would not comment to KXLF on the issue, but did take a message.
And a lot of times people don't know that some services that their children, their family members, some of that money, and sometimes often it is Medicaid money.
A bill removing the sunset date on Montana's Medicaid recently passed the state legislature and is on its way to the governor's office. Some protesters were also there to demand protection for Social Security or just to speak out against the Trump administration.
I just don't believe that Trump and his minions are going to, I don't think they care about people.
In Butte, John Amy, MTN News.
Montana is no stranger to natural disasters. The Treasure State has recently experienced historic wildfires and floods, but response could be ramping up as these costly and deadly disasters become more common. It's a big focus for the Montana Red Cross's newest leader. Standing outside the Lockwood Fire Station, Executive Director Hannah Zuroff says the organization helps hundreds of people across the state, mobilizing to disasters locally and across the country, even recently to Los Angeles. But that response will need to grow, she says. Last year, they responded to 24 home fires in Billings and set up 7 wildfire evacuation shelters across Montana.
Extreme weather events are going through the roof, right? From last decade to now, we've seen double the events and an 85% increase in disasters costing more than $1 billion. So when you're thinking about it in that way, you know, scaling impact is really important for us, and we're really funded by the $20 gift. So
Zuroff says although the Red Cross is a national organization, they take of their home base first. She says they do get federal funding, which makes up about 3% of their budget, funded through the Department of Defense.